Okay, you need to be able to find information about your tangent graphs based on what the function looks like. Okay, the first ones I'm going to look at have no shifting. Okay, so there's no horizontal or vertical shifting, but there is some scaling that's changed. Okay, so there's some stretch factor, and then the period will compress it or expand it. Okay, but let's talk through this first example. I'll have you do the other two on your own. So if we look at this first example right here, the stretch factor is equivalent to what the asymptotes are on your sine and cosine. Okay, it's the multiplier in front of the whole function, absolute value. So the stretching factor is a 5 for this function. To find the period, we take pi and divide by whatever the multiplier is in front of our x. So here we're dividing by pi over 6, which is like multiplying by its reciprocal, 6 over pi. So pi times 6 over pi, the pi's cancel, and we get our period is 6. Okay, now, to find the vertical asymptotes, what we know, because there's no horizontal shifting here, and what I'm going to do anytime I sketch these is I would always sketch my horizontal shift as being the point that crosses what I would equate to my midline. And so since there's no vertical shifting here, the line that we can equate to the midline is going to be the origin. We know that our graph has to pass through this, right? Our basic generic tangent graph looks like this. Okay, so if I look at that or think about that form right here, then my vertical asymptote is going to be to the left and to the right of this point in the same distance, right? And that same distance is going to be what fraction of my period? If the total period is 6, then I know each of those, to find the vertical asymptotes, is going to be moved half of that, right? So half of 6 is 3. Half of 6 here is 3. So my vertical asymptotes are going to be x equals 3 and x equals negative 3. When you write these to the left of the origin, okay, read what they say. I try to give you some instructions on which ones I want. X equals negative 3, x equals positive 3. Vertical asymptotes do have an equation form. It's always going to be x equals whatever those numbers are. Now, since I talked about these, and just to make sure that you are aware, the basic generic form of our tangent graph would look like this, but what is the number in front of our tangent? It's a negative, so this is going to be reflected. So it wouldn't actually look like that. It would look like this. And the fact that there's a 5 as the stretch factor means it's going to be a little bit steeper. It won't be as flat here. It'll get steep faster. But that would be kind of like what the sketch of this tangent would look like. It would look something like this if you were doing multiple periods. But that's the basic, what this graph would look like. Okay, so for this second example here, the stretching factor is 4. The period is pi divided by 8 over 5, which is like multiplying by 5 over 8. So you get 5 pi over 8 is the period. Okay, which means when we look at the sketch for this, because it's a tangent, we're starting at that sort of reference point, which is on, again, what equates to the midline. Okay, so that's going to be right here. And then since there's no shifting, the vertical asymptotes are going to be equal distances away from this point. If we know that the total period is 5 pi over 8, what's half of that going to be? So remember, if you take half of it, you multiply by 1/2. So this is going to be 5 pi over 16, which means this is going to be negative 5 pi over 16. So there's our two asymptotes. To the left of the origin is the negative, so negative 5 pi over 16. And to the right is positive 5 pi over 16. And when you look, the stretch factor is 8. The period can be found by taking pi divided by And what is the multiplier of x? 1 over 3, so that's equivalent to multiplying by the reciprocal, giving us 3 pi. So because I don't see any shift here, my point that I begin with is the origin. Okay, and my asymptotes are going to be equal distances away from that. And if I know that my total period is 3 pi, each of these is going to be half of that, or 3 pi over 2. Okay, and so my vertical asymptotes will be x equals to the left of the origin, negative 3 pi over 2, and to the right, positive 3 pi over 2. Okay, and so that is the process that you would look at in working through this.